Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria King, and I am a music teacher. I am at Jamesville DeWitt Middle School in Central New York, which was rich in the Underground Railroad history. And I am talking to my good friend, Reggie Harris, who is a wonderful singer, songwriter, and storyteller who tells us on and sings a lot about the Underground Railroad. Hi, Mr. Harris. How are you today?
I am fine, Victoria. It's great to see you and great to be with you.
Great to be with you. So, I have some questions, and my students have some questions. And one of the questions we'd like to start with is if you had the opportunity, like Harriet Tubman, would you have been brave enough to go back and get many people and take them to freedom?
Wow, what a powerful question. I don't know that any of us truly knows what we would do in that kind of situation. I don't think Harriet knew when she first ran away. Her first journey, of course, was to save herself. And she had been working, as an entrepreneur, really. She was there in the Bucktown, Maryland, Cambridge, Maryland area. And she had a lot of freedom, a lot of autonomy to sort of come and go as she wanted. But finally, she just got tired of the way that her master treated her and decided that she would run. I don't think when she ran away for the first time and made it to Philadelphia that she considered that she was going to go back. But, situations come up. And she, in Philadelphia, safe and supported, had a job and had a community, heard that two of her brothers were about to be sold and knew that her sisters and others were in danger. And something just came over her, and she just decided that her own freedom was not enough. And I think that's the kind of thing when we're personally affected by some information that comes our way. We never know how we're going to spring into action. She decided, against all encouragement and advice in Philadelphia, to go back because people knew how dangerous it was going to be and that she could lose her freedom. But she decided that she had to. She was compelled to go back and help her brothers. Would I in the same situation? I'd like to think that I would. But, having made that journey once, she knew what the risks were and she knew how dangerous it was. Um, I don't know. I would like to say yes. I would go back and I would help my family or someone. She had no intentions of going back and helping as many people as she did. But having done it once, then she said, "I'm good at this," and her anger and frustration over the fact that slavery was not ending also compelled her. So um, I will say a very big maybe, and I would like to believe that I would be that brave.
So, could you tell us about some of the what you understand were the difficulties and the experiences and how people helped and what houses were like on
Hmm.
the Underground Railroad?
Well, I think first and foremost we have to remember that slavery was supported by the United States government. And that even in the states in the North where slavery had been abolished, Pennsylvania and New York and Massachusetts, there were still a lot of not only people who were still supporting slavery, but there were businesses, there were authorities, and there was a whole system of government that supported this. So, in order to work on the Underground Railroad, you were actually working against the wishes of the United States government. If you were in slave states, you were breaking the law. And I don't think we have an appreciation for how truly devastating that was. People like Thomas Garrett, who, helped in Delaware, and people like Harriet Tubman or John Brown, who went into slave states and actually took people out, they were risking being captured and thrown in jail. They were risking having any possessions taken, huge fines, having their homes burned to the ground. They were risking bodily injury or death. So that's the level of effort that it took. And yet those people were willing to risk all of that and to put their lives on the line, their property on the line. Um, uh, the actual act of having people in your home, remember, you're bringing people into your house. You don't know who they are. You don't, many people, they did it because they really did believe that all human beings are equal. Some people, didn't. There were some white people who really weren't used to, or even had never come in contact with black people before. Um, some people did it philosophically. They thought, that in this country founded on the basis of freedom, that there was no place for slavery. Other people thought about it from a monetary point of view. They thought that this slavery thing was endangering the finances of the country long term. Some people did it for religious reasons. There were all sorts of reasons why people decided that they would, become agents or conductors on the railroad. And as any human endeavor, it was complicated. So there were a lot of reasons and a lot of situations that, we don't always think about. Often we think about this very simply, that, there were these brave people who went and saved people from slavery. And we also forget about the fact that people in slavery were helping themselves. They were actually working very hard to, create situations where they could escape or others could escape. They were passing information. And they were advocating for their own, well-being as well. So they weren't just placid, people sitting around waiting for somebody to come and save them. Most people who escaped on the Underground Railroad escaped by themselves. They escaped on foot, and they took on whatever was coming just with the passion of trying to get to freedom. So that's really the large story of the Underground Railroad, was that people had to act on their own and then receive maybe a little bit of help here and there.
Could you talk about the music and the melodies and the codes and how that helped people find their freedom and find their way to safety?
Hmm. Well, the first thing about the music was that this was something, in terms of the actual singing and the passion of the singing, that came from Africa. They brought this with them on the slave ships. And, most people came on the slave ships naked, and they didn't have possessions they could bring. Maybe they brought an instrument, maybe they brought something small, beads or whatever. But for the most part, what they brought with them was in their head and their heart. So they were recreating what they knew. And in the African village, of course, you had the griot, who was the storyteller, song leader, who led people in song. You had songs for all sorts of occasions. It's an oral culture, so they're used to singing and telling stories. It's how they passed information. That's how they remembered things. They find themselves here. They're having to recreate an entire life and cosmology, an entire way of being. Song was one of the most important ways to do that. They also were looking around, and they're seeing the things that are happening around them. They're hearing stories from this other culture and from, things like the Bible that is being read to them. They hear the stories of Jews being in captivity in Egypt. And they go, wait a minute. Now, the masters are reading them these stories, trying to get them to adopt Christianity, which many of them did. But the masters thought that this would make them more docile, more controllable, because the masters didn't know anything about their own religions that they brought with them, which they did. And they took their own religions and matched them up against this Christianity. And they found resonance. They found similarities in those stories. They then took those stories and they put them to song so they could remember them and spread them around between them. The songs gave them strength. The song gave them passion. And then they figured out ways to put secret codes in the songs. So if you sang a song like "Let Us Break Bread Together on Our Knees," "When I Fall on My Knees with My Face to the Rising Sun," which was a song that they could sing right in front of the master because it was a song talking about worship and talking about relationship to God. They loaded in a whole nother language into that reminded them that they could get together. Let us break bread together. Let's have a meeting. Let's have a secret meeting. Let's talk about what we need to talk about. They would also frame things in, when Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go, oppressed so hard they could not stand. Well, the masters heard them singing that, and they said, oh, they're singing about that Bible story about Moses and the children of Israel. Well, they were also singing about getting to heaven, which was a secret code word for a place where you could go to be free. And after 1850, heaven actually meant Canada. So they had several things going on. They could sing these songs that made the master feel good about what they were singing. And of course, masters thought a singing slave was a happy slave. They would sing these songs, and the master would say, "Oh, they seem to work better." Well, they were using the songs as work songs, but they were also planting in messages about looking for opportunities to get to freedom. Wade in the Water was a song they came up with talking about the experience of the Jews getting to the Red Sea and trying to get away from slavery. But they got to the Red Sea and something amazing happened, and they got across the sea. And these people started singing about making sure that you had enough water on your journey, making sure that you remembered to walk in that water. Why? Because you cover your tracks. And also because when you walk in water, the dogs would have a tougher time picking up your scent. Also, slave states are often separated from free states by water,
Rivers.
rivers and streams. So all of that went into it, and now they're working on two different levels. They're working on a concrete level of this is how you get to freedom. Use the North Star. They would put in that, so that, use moss on the side of trees. All of those things became weapons in their effort to get to freedom. And it became a weapon because the songs also, as songs do, they make us feel different. They make us feel more empowered. They make us feel like we are together, like we have a sense of community. And that was huge. They came up with melodies that were really similar to the ones in Africa, but they also were hearing melodies from these new people that, owned them or they were in close proximity to. So they picked up, European melodies as well, which also made the songs a lot more conducive to feeling good to the masters when they heard them singing them. And also because that was their tradition. The spontaneity of using what was around you and the spontaneity of being creative, of putting things in songs that were happening right here, right now. It made for a very interesting mix of tools for them to use.
Were the codes ever infiltrated?
Oh, absolutely. For two reasons. One, you had people who, the masters certainly had a lot of reasons to try to figure out that these codes existed and what they were. And you had also people who were in slavery who, for a little money, a little more food, a promise not to have your sister, brother, or mother sold away from you, might be willing to give up information to the master or to someone else if they found it out. And there were also people who understood that these were not just dumb subhuman beings, that these were clever people and that things were going on. So the codes had to be changed. The codes were infiltrated. You had a lot of people who were making money by recapturing people who escaped, and they would beat them or torture them to find out things that they needed to know. So yeah, the as with any secret code, there was the job of keeping the code secret, and then there was also the job of changing it in case something was found out.
And were the codes in anything else besides music?
Well, they came up with ways to put the codes in their play. There were ways in which people would, either play a game, and there was one that I know. Um, there was one case where I heard somebody sent their kids out to play, and they were really out there to see if there was anybody nearby, maybe a slave catcher who was watching the property, and they were told to spin a wheel a certain way if they saw someone who looked strange. But also, they found ways to send codes with their working tools. They used them as percussion, and they would have, codes that they came up with. Also, in some limited areas, quilts were used as codes. They would sew patterns into quilts, and they could display them for people who were traveling. People are ingenious, and they will come up with what they have to come up with to, get where they need to go or to pass messages that they do. Obviously, they were used to communicating through drums, but masters figured that out pretty early on. And in most places, the playing of drums was prohibited, with exception to the area in Louisiana, particularly around New Orleans, where there were so many collisions of cultures that masters didn't seem to be as tuned into the fact that people were playing these, messages in drums. But also, there were codes that were put into dance. They would do certain dances, and Some of those, there's one called Campuega that still people still dance. Came from people who were in slavery in South America, and it was a way. It was actually a dance and a martial art, and they would do this dance, and they would do it in such a way that not only were they communicating information, but they were also preparing themselves for some of the resistance that might come up. But people would often use broom handle, or they would play rhythms on their bodies in what we call ham bone. There were all kinds of ways that people communicated.
We have some questions about you, Mr. Harris. First of all, we want to know what is the first spiritual you ever heard and what is the first spiritual you ever learned? Maybe same one.
Well, the first spiritual I learned and heard was This Little Light of Mine. And I heard that song when I was about 3 years old. And my mother tells me that was one of the first songs I sang. And and growing up, I didn't really know that it was called a spiritual. I didn't know that these were songs that rose out of the time of slavery, but they had been passed down as so many things. Um, and but in my church, we sang a lot of those. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and my absolute and total favorite, Wade in the Water. um, and then others that really were so powerful and are so powerful because many of them are still really being sung in a variety of ways today. Songs that take on the expression of devastation of the human condition, of, explaining or expressing how treatment just makes us feel less than human, less than powerful. But also, that the great thing about the spirituals is that they really connect in all sorts of ways. So they don't just stay in talking about how bad things are. They talk about how we might rise out of that. One of these mornings, bright and fair, I'm going to put on my wings and try the air. And that comes up often in a number of spirituals because often they would take those verses because it's an oral culture and also because people were not literate, being from an oral culture, and they would transpose them in different songs. So they were ready made to sort of put them wherever they needed them. But that very thing, you hear about people flying. Flying Africans is the way that it's often put in context. There's stories about the people who could fly, and they were talking about very fanciful things, but the reality was they were really talking about staying focused on freedom. So yeah, I sang those songs, and then as I got older, I started doing the research to find out how those songs were connected, both in the past and then how they came forward in the civil rights movement and became organizing songs for voting rights and for having the job of your choice and for being able to go to a school that really helped you to learn as opposed to being segregated and only taught you certain things. And then just the whole general idea of being a fully vested citizen in our nation, which those people unfortunately were not, even though they helped to build the country.
Have you ever felt incredible singing a spiritual? And have you ever felt sad singing a spiritual?
Both of those things are true. I have, the spirituals for me, because I grew up singing them in my church and in my community, they're a really wonderful place to go when I need to express uh, either of those things. When I sing, "Oh Lord, how come me? Oh Lord, how come me? Oh Lord, how come me? I wish I never been born." There's just no way to sing that. They took my children away. They took my freedom away. They took my name away. They treat me so mean, Lord. I wish I had never been born. Songs like that just give you an opportunity to pour your heart and soul into a moment and think about what might be causing you your pain, but also, to sing a song like one of these mornings so bright and fair, thank God Almighty we're free at last, I'm gonna put on my wings and try the air, thank God Almighty we're free at last, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty we're free at last. The people who made up that song weren't free, and they had no evidence that they were ever going to be free. But they were singing themselves, as the spirituals do. They were singing themselves into the future. They were singing themselves into the aspiration, the hope that one day, if they stayed with it, if they passed it on to their children, one day freedom would be a reality, which is exactly why Martin Luther King Jr., when he was finishing off his I Have a Dream speech, reached back and picked up that little piece of a song. And that's what he was talking about when he said, one day we will be able to say, all of us together, we're free at last. Because even in 1963, when he was making that speech, he knew that all African Americans weren't free, and all women weren't free, and all people around the world weren't free. He was able to send out that message all at once that we're still working.
So, one of our questions was, why did you choose this? But I think we know why now.
I like to say I couldn't not choose it.
It sounds like it chose you.
Yeah, pretty much. This was not where I was headed.
Do you have any relatives that were slaves or that were part of the Underground Railroad? Do you know?
My great 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 grandmother was in slavery in Virginia on a plantation called Hickory Hill, and one of her children, her daughter, escaped for a period of time, probably only a few days. She did not escape on the Underground Railroad. She ran off by herself. She was recaptured and brought back. And no other member of my family that I know about actually managed to make an escape. They lived 30 miles north of Richmond, Virginia, and when the siege of Richmond came, of course, the Union Army was coming south, and they came right to that plantation, which was owned by Williams Carter Wickham, who was a Confederate general and a state legislator, and eventually president of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad after the Civil War. And they took possession of his property, and they used it as a base camp. And Williams Carter Wickham, of course, was off fighting. They, having lost the war, then he had to free his slaves. But that's where my family comes from. Williams Carter Wickham had 6 children by Bibhana, my great 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 grandmother, which makes him my great 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 grandfather.
What is the one favorite thing that you did when you were a kid?
Oh my goodness. Well, when I was a kid, once I was introduced to sports, it was all bets are off. So I spend hours playing sports, and now I can't play as much because of my knees, because of years of playing. But I watch a lot of sports, and I don't just watch games. I coached for about 25 years, so I'm always interested in knowing how to play better. And that or how teams build their chemistry, or ways in which you can help people to understand sort of the next level of a game. But I also read, and I love watching movies. So I could watch 6 movies in a day easily. Unfortunately, I don't usually have the time to do that, but one a day is not bad. And I love conversation. So I really like to have the opportunity to talk to people, not just about the weather or even sports. I like to talk about issues. I read a lot on in the papers and magazines and books about history and music and the ways in which human beings interact, and I like to get into conversations about that. And then I don't necessarily like to cook, but I love to eat. So I'm more than happy to spend time eating. And over the pandemic, actually, since I've been at home mostly, I've had to spend a little bit more time cooking and figuring out how to make things. And actually, I'm beginning to find some joy in chopping and and experimenting with ways to cook things. And food has taken on a little bigger of focus for me, even though I still don't like to think about it. And I'm told by real foodies that I don't think about food enough. So I let them think about the food, and then I just try to get what they think about it, and so I can eat. So that's mostly what takes up my time. That and just really enjoying. I promised myself, I live in a very beautiful area, and I promised myself that even though I don't like to walk long distances, and my knees don't like me to, I like to walk outside and just stand and listen, and take in the beauty of nature and see. Yesterday I was watching 8 deer come up my driveway, and just watching their movements and watching them communicate with each other. They weren't particularly happy with me being outside, but they got over it, and just watching them come up my driveway, which is still filled with snow, and they walked up into the woods, and just kind of watching the way they interacted with their surroundings was fascinating.
Thank you so much. We look we look forward to the time when you can come and we can see you live and hear you.
Well, I look forward to that time too, and for the opportunity that we can all sing together.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Hey, it's great to see you.